In this video, I'm going to show you game one from the third place playoff match between Andrei Esipenko and Noribek Yakubboev. Now, this might be the third place playoff, but of course there is more at stake here than the actual final between Sindarov and Wei Yi. Okay, they're playing for a world title. Big deal. The third place playoff is for the final spot in the candidates tournament. And that really is worth something. Wei Yi and Sindarov, of course, are already there. So, fascinating matchup. Both of these players, 23 years old, done fantastically well to get through to the final. I'd say that Esipenko has had a slightly tougher draw. Of course, he lost his match against Wei Yi when he made a horrible blunder. So, big question, could he actually bounce back in this match? It's a tough one, but, well, he's got a second chance. He's got a chance to redeem himself. And, well, likewise for Yakubboev, losing against his compatriot Sindarov. I don't think Yakubboev played particularly well in that match, actually. I think the first game, which he lost, I think he was just outplayed strategically, actually. So anyway, for both players, this is their big moment. Can they make a comeback? So I'm going to look at their first game. Just before we look at the game very quickly, just to mention, Chessable sale on at the moment. I think my courses on the Kalashnikov and the Anti-Sicilians for black, they're on sale for just 2 or 3 more days, so do check those out. I'll put the links down below. And live broadcast coming up on the channel on Tuesday evening, 7 PM UK. I'll be interviewing Charles Hurton, the author of a splendid book on Paul Morphy, so do check that out. Right, let's crack on with this game. Esipenko opened with e4. And we've got a Sicilian, always interesting, and open Sicilian, knight f6. Are we going to see a Sveshnikov? That is a Sveshnikov after e5. But no, Yakubboev plays e6. Now this could still transpose to a Sveshnikov if white plays knight b5, and then bishop f4, and so on. But instead, after e6, he decided to play knight takes c6. And then e5, knight d5, and knight e4. So this is already, a very dynamic position, certainly a lot of imbalance here. And there are, 3 main moves. Bishop b7, as played in the game. There's queen c7, and there's also f5. I remember when I was a kid playing this as black, and this was quite a common position actually. Easier for white to play than black, but anyway, that's another story. Bishop b7 played. Bishop d3 and queen c7, hitting this pawn. f4 and knight b4. That's of course an important bishop, because if that one goes, then this bishop on b7 has no opponent. So very important to keep that one. c5, so you can see that bishop has enormous potential. Bishop f3, matching the bishop on b7 and supporting the knight on e4. It's a position that's been seen before. Yakubboev seemed a bit uncertain actually. He thought for over 13 minutes in this position. Previously we've seen rook d8, we've also seen c4, but Yakubboev went for bishop d5. And certainly, just optically, this looks like an easier position for white to play than black. I do like that pawn on e5. The knight is in the perfect position to play behind it as well. Black always has to be careful about this move. Indeed, in this position, Esipenko had a very interesting opportunity. He could have played knight d6. And after this exchange, well, queen takes is impossible because of c4. pinning and winning a piece. So bishop takes f3, rook f3, so the queen guards the d pawn. And after queen b6, let's say, then white can get a nice initiative with f5. Now, the only danger is if this peters out, then this could somehow be a dead pawn on d6 and black plays around it. Nevertheless, it's a very dangerous initiative. But I find it interesting that Esipenko rejects that and plays instead bishop e3. You know, I think he's the kind of player that doesn't like to overpress. You know, he would have looked at the positional characteristics of that and just thought, well, it could go wrong. So he prefers a sound developing move. Castles. And yeah, I mean, there are various things you could do here. But knight g3 decides to sort of keep it simple. Wanted to exchange off that bishop on d5, and that just sorts out white's pieces. So the rooks are now connected. The queen has reached a good position. Yeah, I mean, basically I would still prefer white here. White is just a bit more active. d5 from Yakubboev. So, tricky decision. You know, what do you do about this pawn? You could break it down like this. But, got to be a little bit careful. You know, black's king after this exchange could be a bit vulnerable. This knight heads back into the middle. And those pawns also, you know, it's not clear where they're going to sit. Do they stay back? Do they advance? But that creates weaknesses. Not so clear. So Yakubboev prefers d5. Now, they're strong. So that d-pawn is eliminated. And again, a very straightforward continuation from Esipenko. I mean, you could bring the knight back into the middle, but instead f5. So he would very much like it if a knight ended up on f5. And yeah, it's not such an easy position for black. We've got to watch out for f6 coming, or indeed perhaps just isolating a pawn on e6. And this knight e5 and either queen h5 or queen e4, it's still quite a tricky position for black. So Yakubboev decided he wanted clarity. He took on g3. Didn't fancy that position. He was coming under pressure there. But this endgame is not simple for black. That's a strong bishop, and black has weak pawns. So first of all, that one's attacked, so black has to waste the tempo playing c4 and an exchange of pawns on e6, and you can see 3 isolated pawns. Now, those double G pawns aren't beautiful, however, that's a nice pawn formation. But white certainly is better here. Rook d1. Now, of course, one would very much like to oppose the rook on this open file. Rook d8, for example. But then in exchange, and bishop takes pawn. Pawn up. So this is tricky. Remember, rook and bishop are a very strong duo. And I think we can see it here. You know, they're great long-range pieces. So here is where Yakubboev really had to knuckle down and find something. And he did. Rook b8. Okay, going for counterplay. Rook d6. Okay, really dangerous. Knight e5. So the knight activates. Esipenko wins a pawn. But knight g4. So all plotted in advance. And if that rook can break through on b2 in combination with the knight. Doesn't look bad. So the bishop dropped back to c1 to protect the pawn. Rook d8. Threat of rook d1 and mate. So the king stepped out. So that means that after the check, then white's rook can interpose. So Esipenko is a pawn up, but black's pieces are active. Although, you know, the bishop is passive, I have to say during the game this just looked very promising for white. You know, that's an isolated pawn. Yes, the knight is well placed on g4, but somehow you feel that white is always going to be able to wriggle out of this. Okay, let's see what happened. King f7, rook e2. Yakubboev played rook d5. In fact, probably still okay for black after this. The rook stays active. And then king f6, looking to play g5, just activate the king. I mean, I still prefer white here, but black definitely has counterplay. You know, something like this here. I mean, the game reels on. And black might be okay. But, you know, you've got to play really precisely. But that looks like the move. Rook e1 and rook d3. Just maintaining that activity. But Yakubboev played rook d5. And the king just crawled over. And little by little you feel that Esipenko is getting there. Knight e5 played. Yakubboev was running a little bit short of time, but we're only on move 30. And this looks like a very tempting maneuver from the knight to come in on d3, obviously checking the king, hitting the bishop. Would have been better to wait. Just secure the knight on g4. But anyway, this move was obviously underestimated. b3. You know, at first you think, well, there's a huge check on d3. The king has to step over to protect the bishop. That's what happened. So where's the discovered check? Knight f4, rook d2. Nothing doing. Yeah, let's just see that. Rook d2, and after the exchange, well, that's very unfortunate because black's knight is trapped. It's a very nice idea from Esipenko. He played very, very carefully. So Yakubboev came up with h5. Really, it's kind of a nothing move. Yes, it's nice to sort of block those pawns, but it shows that black can't actually do anything active. Maybe Yakubboev had overlooked that after this, he's not actually getting a pawn back. Because in this position, yes, pawns are attacked, but check. And then rook f3. Saves the extra pawn and, well, we can't say this is definitely winning, but obviously a clear pawn up and white has good winning chances. So king d1, h5. Now the best move is bishop e3, and actually there's still no good discovered attack, and white is on easy street there once the bishop reaches d4. Instead, Esipenko went bishop d2, and if black waits, let's say with a6, it's still in doubt. Still not so easy, but instead rook a5 played. The rook defends a2, the bishop has come to its best square. It's going to reach d4. Takes. Black really has nothing to do here. And there was a nice finish. So basically black's pieces are being pushed back. And after rook g3, Very sweet winning move. That knight has gone. Well, you can see all these squares are covered. They're taken. There's only one left. If knight e5, bishop f4, double attack wins the knight. So in this position, Yakubboev resigned. Very, very accomplished technical performance from Esipenko. And the way he played chess, for me, that was a very, very typical of that sort of formal Russian school, or the Soviet school, however you want to call it, where basically there was nothing, there were no rash lunges. So in this position, yes, knight d6 is an interesting possibility. But if it goes wrong, then that pawn isn't so great on d6. And then later on, he found a very clear way to play. So just connecting the rooks. And this position, again, a very clear way to play with f5. Challenging black. And in the endgame, I thought his technique was superb. Yeah, white is better, but you've still got to finish it off. And Yakubboev fought well, but in this position, I think Esipenko did brilliantly to put the maximum pressure on black and win the game. So Esipenko bounces back, and I have to say, I think we've seen Yakubboev's deficiencies as a player in this game, but also in the game that he lost in the previous round in the tiebreak against Sindarov. I think technically he's not as good as Esipenko. But we shall see. He has a chance to hit back in game 2 tomorrow. Can he do it? This is the big match. The winner of this match will qualify for the candidates. Let's see what happens.